Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this interview. I'm Tim Ball. I'm with the Texas High School Baseball website, and I'm here with Mike Gustafson. And we're interviewing Mike because he wrote this book, To the Road and Back, the stories of Bobby Moegle's 40 years as baseball coach at Lubbock Monterey High School. And so that just came out last month in June. A little bit about Mike. He's a founding board member of the College Baseball Foundation. He served as president and CEO of the organization since 2009. Mike also played at Lubbock Monterey High School under Coach Moegle in 1984 and 85. Both of those years advancing to the state tournament. He was a two-time All-City and All-District middle infielder at Monterey. And he also attended Texas Tech and played baseball there from 1986 to 1989. So, Mike, welcome. Glad that you're here today.
Well, thanks for having me, Tim. It's good to be with you.
Well, Mike, let's get into this. So, Coach Moegle, obviously a great high school baseball coach. He leads all Texas high school baseball coaches in wins with 1,115 wins. He's made 13 tournament appearances, 4 state championships. So obviously a good coach. But what prompted you to write a book about him?
Yeah, that's kind of a loaded question. It's a good question to ask. Anytime those of us who are around Coach Moegle are together, the stories start flying. And in fact, in one of the very last quotes in the book, I think the next to the last quote in the book was from Travis Walden, who was one of Coach Moegle's pitchers on the 1981 state championship team, and then played at Lubbock Christian a little bit professionally, and has coached at Monterey, has been an assistant coach, and been all through college, really been at college baseball. Really been at baseball at all levels. And Travis talks about, when two of Coach Moegle's players are together, even if they don't know it, within about 5 to 10 minutes, it's going to be revealed to each other because they're going to say something. They're going to tell a story that touches a chord, and like, wait, you played for Coach Moegle too, and so just for ever since I graduated, when a bunch of us are together, the stories are great, and we were all affected by it. Obviously, it was. You mentioned the 13 trips to the state tournament. Obviously, in Texas, that means the Final Four at a time that they were always in the big school division, and 4 state championships. He's the only high school coach high school baseball coach, in the Texas Sports Hall of Fame. So the success is just, breathtaking in many respects. But I had a meeting with John David Crow. It was really a chance meeting. John David Crow, of course, Texas A&M football player who played under Bear Bryant there, and Heisman Trophy winner. Coach Bryant's only Heisman Trophy winner. And it was a meeting here in Lubbock, 15 years or so ago. But when I was a kid, we moved to Lubbock from Tuscaloosa, and John David Crow was on Coach Bryant's staff there at that time, and John David Crow Jr. was a running back at Alabama. And so I thought, I'm going to go say hi to him. Well, the stories started unfolding, and I was really just fishing with him on Bear Bryant stories. But the stories that he told and the way they were affected by him were so similar to the way we were affected by Coach Moegle. And we swapped those stories back and forth. And I thought, you know what, I think there's something here. I think there's something here that appeals to people that maybe didn't play directly for Coach. And then, obviously in the book, you've seen it now, it goes into, he gets into a lot of his philosophy and other things. So there's some things in there for the coaches, but there's also, our stories and the players' stories of successful games and great moments. And, when I was putting it together, I got to a point that there's 30 interviews in the book, and I thought, man, I've got to stop this writing. I've got to stop these interviews and get the book written. Because in some respects, I was 15 years into it, but I was really about 4 or 5 years into the actual writing of it and the interviews that I did. And I thought, I've got to get this thing done. Because the book could be 700 pages if I went and just sought more interviews. And believe me, there's plenty more good stories out there.
So you interviewed 30 30 people. Now, I was thinking, I saw two of those were sports writers. I can't remember, was there 28 players, or I can't remember the breakdown.
Yeah. Couple of his assistant coaches, and probably all, but maybe 3 or 4 were his players. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Some of them were assistant coaches, and so tell me about that. Tell me about that process of interviewing, and I'm also I like the story about where you thought you were going, but ended up with different chapter headings.
Sure. Again, I talk about this being a 15-year process. Somewhere, I don't know, 2008, 09, maybe 2010, Coach Moegle had actually given me some recordings of interviews that had been done about him by Lubbock ISD TV, and I don't know if they'd put together the material thinking they were going to do something with it, in terms of a video or something. I don't know, but and then I'd also gotten access to a couple of Coach Moegle's oral histories that he had done, long form interviews that he had done about his life with the Southwest Collection, Special Collections Library at Texas Tech. And so after listening to those and even going so far as to transcribe them and go, you know what, I think I've got some content here. I mean, I think I've got what I need. When I really made the decision to go for it with this book, I did another dozen, maybe 15 or so interviews, and my interviews tended to skew a little younger toward guys my age and younger, because the ones that I'd been given were from a lot of his players from the 1960s and early 70s. And then I also wanted to fill in the gap with some of his assistant coaches and whatnot. And then I sought some content online. I emailed some Facebook things, and got some written responses as well. And so the content is really from about 30 different people. I think exactly 30 different people. I probably sat with a dozen to 15 of those for longer interviews. And then there's several that were just email correspondence. But, and there was a time that I thought the book would be a chapter from Jimmy Webster, and a chapter from Brad Walker, and a chapter from Gary Ashby, all telling their stories. But as I really typed all that content and got very familiar with it and transcribing it, I realized that the themes were evolving just based on either the way the questions were asked or just what they were talking about. And it really evolved into about 7 or 8 or 9 themes, I guess, that became chapters, and they're fairly evenly distributed too, because I was concerned that I'd have some 2-page chapters and then a 100-page chapter, but they're all fairly uniform in length. So it worked out better than probably I deserved.
Well, you have a pretty comprehensive group. I hadn't thought about that, but you've got players from 60s, 70s, 80s. Mm-hmm. Did you get some from the 90s? I was thinking, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, we did. And that was important too, because when you look at Coach Moegle's record, I mean, he took a team to the state tournament in 1961, his second year. And then he went in 94. He won his last state championship in 96, and they lost in the state championship game in 97. He coached 2 more years and got out. And so, I mean, Jimmy Webster says it best. Of course, Jimmy, he was a classmate of mine and a longtime Texas high school baseball coach. Tim, I'm sure you've encountered him, but Jimmy says it. He coached guys that grew up probably dealing with the thought of fighting in Vietnam, all the way to guys that played video games, and that's quite a span. Yeah, that's a generation gap.
It's incredible. Took teams to the state tournament in 4 different decades.
Yeah, amazing.
So the title of the book, To the Road and Back. Tell me about that. How did you come up with that title?
Sure. That might have been, it was actually one of the last decisions I made. It was December of this past year, maybe January. And I was thinking of something that was common to all of us, and a little more inventive than just the Bobby Moegle story or something along those lines. And one thing that all of us did from 1960 to 1999, we all went to the road and back. And what that was, there on the side, we practiced on the south side of the school, just kind of out back. We didn't play games there, but we practiced. There was an infield and enough room to get all our work in. And the field, the backstop was up against 50th Street, which is a pretty main east-west street here in Lubbock. And And there's a street, Gary Avenue, that runs down the east side of the school building, that lot, the east boundary. And whenever infield wasn't going well, or if you'd make an error and then I'd get one hit to me in infield and I'd throw one away, and then the next guy'd boot one, he'd just say, "You guys go the road and back," and we'd drop our gloves right there and run down there. And it was probably 200 or 300 yards down there and 200 or 300 yards back, and then he'd start infield over again, and then you'd boot one and I'd throw one away, and then we'd go back. And so we did a lot of that. Everybody went to the road back. And then sometimes we also did it as just conditioning at the end of the practice. And so it was a route we were familiar with, that's for sure.
I get the sense that if you were a Monterey Plainsman baseball player, to the road and back is all you had to say, and every one of them knows exactly what that means.
Yeah. I've had several of the former players that even before they've read the book, just when they'd come buy it from me and I'd hand it to them, and a lot of them are friends and acquaintances, just as former players and fellow Coach Moegle players, as Coach Moegle calls us, his survivors. They take a look at the book and go, "Man, that title's perfect."
Yeah,
we go, "Well, good. I think I did that part right for sure."
After reading it, I could certainly see that. Well, I did enjoy that, and I did love the chapter headings, and I just a quick plug here. We're not finished yet, but just a quick plug here. It's very fascinating. He's got the chapter headings here, and then you've taken out quotes and comments from a lot of the players from your interviews. You've had to pull those out, and you'll have in just different stories or comments from each of these guys. It was a really great read, and I loved hearing different people's perspectives, and some of them would say the same thing no matter which decade they played in. And so, well, let's talk a little bit more about Coach Moegle. So you played for him a couple of years. You talked to all these players, his former players. And so what would you say were like some of the 3 or 4 things that made Coach Moegle such a highly successful coach?
Sure. I think a key thing that we all have to acknowledge is when he first got out here, and he actually came here in the summer of '59, straight from pro ball. I mean, he retired from pro baseball in North Carolina and came to Lubbock. Really sight unseen, because he had grown up in Taylor, which is down around Austin, and he's told the story to me since then. I think it may even be in the book that he'd hardly ever been east of I-35 at that point in his life, growing up in the 30s and 40s. And
I remember him saying he didn't get out of the county much.
Yeah, that's it. And other than some competitions and to do a couple different things, to go into Austin, he played a bunch of high school and tennis, and he played a couple things out that way, but he definitely wasn't a world traveler. He wasn't even much of a state traveler. But anyway, he takes the job, from a payphone in North Carolina, hangs up his baseball career, and comes out here more or less sight unseen. And, when he got here, he inherited a good group, and he talks about that group. A lot of those kids had success as juniors, had some success as juniors, but they won the American Legion state championship that summer. And so the team he inherited had one really good pitcher in Donnie Bumpus, and Dr. Bumpus is a retired faculty at Sam Houston State and lives in Huntsville. And so he had his number one pitcher, and he had a good core group. And he toughened them up, and he and I've joked about it, and I said, "Coach, that's because he liked the analogy of the Bear Bryant stuff in the book." And I said, "Coach, those guys in the early 60s, and all of us who came after him appreciate them, but we all talk about those guys were your junction boys, because Coach was tough with them."
Was the junction boy.
Exactly. And he was single at that time, so he had nothing but time. He talks about there were no rules, so all we did was practice every day till dark. The season would end, they'd roll right into summer ball, and same thing. And so that's a key part of that, is that when he got out here, he had a talented core. And he said, I was coaching against a lot of football coaches. He said, there was probably 4 or 5 pretty good baseball men out here in West Texas. And he said, so I was able to get traction, and he was just so far ahead of others at that time. And then he has the success of a state team, immediately starts winning district, has a state tournament his second year, state tournament appearance in his 4th year, and they're off and rolling. And then the state championships of the early 70s. And so by the time that program really got going into the 70s, he'll say it was on cruise control, but it really was in the sense that we grew up around town going to his baseball school, which everybody does now, but he was doing that really ahead of his time. And we all grew up watching those kids that were older than us and those guys that were older than us play. And I hope I get to do that someday. And so that thing was so entrenched that when it came time for discipline and order and all those things, he didn't get challenged, because first of all, we knew there was no nonsense. But second of all, we knew that if we wanted to be a part of it, we had to do these things. His approach was very fundamental, and really tried and tested in terms of 40 years of coaching and being very familiar with the winds of West Texas. And he even talks about it, early in the year, it was cold and windy and dry. We spent more time with offense. And he said we'd get some spring rains, the grass would green up, and then we'd start really trying to refine defensively to get into the playoffs. And I thought, I mean, now that I think about it, I go, yeah, that's exactly the way it was. He had a reason for it. We just thought, well, coach said do it, and that's what we did. But yeah, just solid fundamental approach, and then just the never complacent. There are several quotes in there talk about that. There was really no days off with coach. If you were having a bad practice, he was going to see it, number one, and you were going to hear about it. And from the outside looking in, people think he was this ogre and this tough guy, and he was tough and no nonsense. But boy, he was a great teacher. And one of the great quotes in that book is that he saw stuff in us that we didn't know we had.
Yeah.
And that's really what any good coach does, or any good teacher. And boy, he brought it out in us, that's for sure.
Wow. So I know he demanded hard work. Yeah, you mentioned that. And I think you're saying it seemed he kind of set a tradition with his school and having success. And I think I read somewhere somebody said something like, when you came up there, you knew you had to live up to the guys before you, and so once you establish that, that does help with a lot of things. And the baseball school was a good thing. And it seems like he did have this. He set the bar high for what it meant to be a baseball player there.
Yeah, Tim, he had a really unique thing that he did, and at the end of each season, he would basically hang this big poster board around the top of the locker room. I can still see it from where I would sit there in the baseball locker room at Monterey there at the school. And 1960 was there, and it would have the top two pitchers and their records, and then it would have first base, second base, third base enlisted, and it was kind of in a block lettering that he did. And then it would have their district champs and 25-8 or whatever their record was, and all these individual players' names and stats. And of course, by the time I got there in 1983, there were, it was 1960 all the way around the room to 1983 over here by the shower. And it ended up going obviously all the way around the room to 1999. And I'm assuming the other coaches may have continued it. But the key thing is we would be in that locker room all the time, every day, just like you do, changing clothes and look around the room and go, man, 1972, they won state right there. And and so that tradition got entrenched.
Wow.
Gary Ashby talks about it. He said, I grew up knowing that Bob Cohn played on one of the early teams, and Bob Cohn's dad was my doctor, and so Coach Ashby saw the story. And so we knew those names. We would meet people later on and go, wait, I know you. I've never met you, but I know about you. You were on the 1965 team or 64 team because I've seen your name up there. And boy, it really, really created this tradition. Tradition. Everybody uses that word, but I mean it really ingrained that in us, because we had a sense of who had played there before, who had been on really good teams, and who had been great players. And those teams that had finished second in district, that we were all like, man, I don't want to be one of those guys, and it was just an amazingly simple thing that worked very well for all of us. And he continued it all the way through. And we all wanted our poster to look really good when we left there.
Well, as you described that, I get this sense almost that just walking into the locker room, there's a reminder that says, remember who you're playing for, so great.
No doubt.
Well, Mike, hey, appreciate this. People, hopefully they're interested in the book. It's a good one. To the Road and Back. Where can they purchase this book?
Sure, it's pretty simple website, www.moeglebook.com, and I'll spell it. It's MOEGLE book.com, moeglebook.com.
Okay, moeglebook.com.
Yep, $25, $2 tax, and $3 shipping, so $30 total.
Okay, all right. Then if you don't remember that, if you didn't get that down, you can go to the Texas High School Baseball website, the front page. We've got an article there, and in there, there's even a place you can click to go there and pick up the book. This is Mike Gustafson, and To the Road and Back. Mike, thank you.
You bet.